something very unusual. Bible prophecy fulfilled. We've had in the Sea of Galilee earthquake swarms, and there are some that say this signals Jesus Christ's second coming. 2 hours ago, the news out of Express UK and also Jerusalem Post, 2 recent earthquake swarms affecting the Galilee, that is of course the Sea of Galilee, Lake Gennesaret, were likely caused by the accelerated extraction of groundwater from aquifers around the lake. Callum Hoare Express UK reports the mysterious swarm of earthquakes under the Sea of Galilee. This was prophesied in the New Testament for the return of Jesus Christ according to a biblical author. Northeast Israel has been the center of seismic activity recently. It all began when in September 2013, locals felt their windows rattling as earthquakes rumbled under the Sea of Galilee. The freshwater lake, as we know, is said to have been the location where Jesus walked on the water, and also, of course, the towns around the lake were the first areas where Jesus and his disciples preached. Please support my Patreon channel since YouTube has again demonetized my YouTube channel. My Patreon channel will have 5 different videos from my YouTube channel every day. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below. 11 of the 12 disciples came from that area. The freshwater lake, the location of where Jesus walked on water, as was told in the New Testament, has developed into a new center for tremors. Most notable in July 2018, when a dozen small earthquakes shook the same spot beneath the lake on a fault, the slip surface along which an earthquake ruptures. As we know, this is one of the areas that is predicted, prophesied to split open before the second coming. Now, what's more, the seismic changes could be interpreted as a sign of biblical proportions. The Gospel of the New Testament says there are 3 mentions of earthquakes near such a lake in relation to the end times. Matthew 24:7 says, "For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places." Mark 13:8 adds, "For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be earthquakes in diverse places, and there shall be famines and troubles. These are the beginnings of sorrows." Luke 21:11 states, "And great earthquakes shall be in diverse places, and famines and pestilences, and fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven." The prophecy cited before by biblical author Gaines Johnson concedes that the increase in seismic activity could suggest something more significant by proposing that only natural events like earthquakes could signal the second coming. He wrote, "These are verses we all have heard preached over and over again, and with every TV news report of another earthquake somewhere in the world, a preacher somewhere is inspired to preach it as a sure sign that the end is near. The problem is earthquakes happen all across the earth every day, and the yearly averages of quake activity have remained fairly constant for many decades." And he goes on to say the Earth's crust is dividing into about 12 major plates, which are constantly shifting, producing earthquakes and volcanic activity on every continent. The Middle East and the countries on the eastern rim of the Mediterranean basin are situated at a geologic crossroads of tectonic plate boundaries. Both Turkey and Greece have experienced major quakes in recent times, and geologists have noted that the floor of the Mediterranean Sea is, of course, fracturing like a sheet of glass as the plates shift. Johnson went on to say that the real event prophesied would occur along the Dead Sea transform fault. He says, but the focal point of end times biblical seismicity is driven by a transform fault that's just east of Jerusalem. The prophesied major future activity will occur along the Dead Sea transform fault, a continuation of the Red Sea and East African rift system. The fault runs directly under the Dead Sea, up the Jordan River Valley, through the Sea of Galilee, and northward through Lebanon. As we know, the Great Rift Valley of Africa is splitting, and that will open up to basically break off east part of the continent of Africa, allowing the sea to come into that Rift Valley. That's the same fault that runs up towards through the Dead Sea, through the Red Sea, through Dead Sea, up the Jordan River, and up through Galilee, all the way up through Lebanon. And we see that this area is moving, the west part of that fault moving outwards towards the Mediterranean, and the eastern part along that line goes towards the north. So that's basically opening up, just like the African Great Rift Valley. Scientists suspect that pumping too much fresh water from underground aquifers from under the Sea of Galilee in that region has unclamped the Dead Sea Fault. The same fault was responsible for much larger events in 1927, when a 6.2 magnitude earthquake shook the area. Scientists feared that the recent swarms, a technical term for a cluster of earthquakes of about the same magnitude, could set off a much more serious earthquake. Emily Brodsky, seismologist at the University of California, said, "Earthquakes trigger more earthquakes, and the Dead Sea Fault is a large fault capable of large damaging earthquakes." And we see the map having to do with the Dead Sea transform, showing the main fault segments and motion of the Arabian Plate, which is basically where we have Syria and Jordan, and the Arabian Plate, and then the African Plate we have, which is the Sinai Peninsula and Israel. The African Plate with Israel moving northwestward, and the Arabian Plate shifting towards the north, showing the main fault segments and motion of the Arabian Plate relative to the African Plate, which has Sinai and Israel. So this is where the great earthquake will take place, which will split basically from what is our Lord Jesus Christ said in the New Testament, the Mount of Olives from Jerusalem, where a Kidron Valley passes in between them. That Kidron Valley is on the fault line. Now the Dead Sea, according to Wikipedia, Dead Sea transform, the DST fault system, referred to as the Dead Sea Rift, is a series of faults that runs from the Maras Triple Junction, East Anatolia Fault in southeastern Turkey, to the northern end of the Red Sea Rift, just offshore of the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula. The fault system forms a transform boundary between the African Plate to the west and the Arabian Plate to the east. It's a zone of left lateral displacement, signifying the relative motions of the two plates, and both these plates are moving in a generally north-northeast direction, but the Arabian Plate is moving faster, resulting in the observed left lateral motions fault along the fault of approximately 107 kilometers. A component of extension is also present in the southern part of the transform, which has contributed to the series of depressions or pull-apart basins from the Gulf of Aqaba, the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, and Hula Basins. The development of the fault zone, the Dead Sea transform began to form during the early to mid-Miocene, when there was a change in plate motions and rifting stopped in the Gulf of Suez Rift. The initial phase of northward propagate reaches as far as the southernmost Lebanon and was followed by a period in the late Miocene where continued displacement across the plate boundary was taken up mainly by shortening in the Palmyride Fold Belt. A total displacement of 64 kilometers has been estimated for this early phase of motion. There is the southern section, about 400 kilometers long, extending from the spreading center in the Red Sea at southern end of Gulf of Aqaba to north of Hula Basin in southernmost Lebanon. And then there's the Gulf of Aqaba, created by movement on 4 left-stepping strike-slip fault segments. Then there's the Wadi Araba, the Arava Valley, segment of the DST extend for about 160 kilometers from the Gulf of Aqaba to southern end of the Dead Sea. Then you have the Dead Sea Basin. Is formed in a pull-apart basin due to the left-stepping offset between Wadi Araba and the Jordan Valley segments. Then you have the Jordan Valley Fault. The Jordan Valley segment of the Dead Sea transformed the Jordan Rift Valley runs for about 100 kilometers from the northwestern part of the Dead Sea to the southeastern part of the Sea of Galilee in the Jordan Valley. All this is a rift valley. The whole thing is a rift valley. The Sea of Galilee Basin, or the Lake Kinneret Basin, is a pull-apart formed between the Jordan Valley Fault along its eastern edge and the set of smaller faults in the north. The central site of the basin's deepest sedimentary fill, its depot center in geologist jargon, lies on the eastern side against the continuation of the Jordan Valley Fault. The thickness of the fill is estimated at 3 kilometers down to the deepest mapped seismic reflection, correlated with the top of the basalt layer that was extruded about 4 million years ago. The basalt is a mafic extrusion igneous rock formed from the rapid cooling of magnesium-rich and iron-rich lava, exposed at or very near the surface of a terrestrial planet or a moon. More than 90% of all volcanic rock on Earth is basalt. Basalt lava has a low viscosity due to its low silica content, resulting in rapid lava flows that can spread over great areas before cooling solidification. Flood basalt describes the formation in a series of lava basalt. So we know, since basalt is there, that means that there is a volcano under there. Sea of Galilee Basin has a volcano under there. Now they recently did find a mound. I remember a couple of years back they found something that was like a cairn at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee. And they thought that somebody had built it there thousands of years before. Could it be that this is part of something deforming under the Sea of Galilee? I have no idea. That's just a comment and a question that I have as we're talking about this. Then you have the Hula Basin. A pull-apart basin lies to the north of the Sea of Galilee Basin, formed between several short fault segments. The Hula Western Border Fault defines the western side of the basin and splits to the north into several faults, including the Rum Fault and the Yamune Fault, and they continue northwards from the northeastern part of the Sea of Galilee, forming the eastern edge of the basin. Lebanon Restraining Bend, with several distinct active fault segments recognized. You have the Yamune Fault, the main fault strand within Lebanon Restraining Bend. It's been the location of several major historic earthquakes, such as the 1202 Syria event. Estimated average slip rate along the Yamune Fault is 4 to 5.5 millimeters a year, with a major earthquake occurring intervals of 1,020 to 1,175 years. There have been no major earthquakes since that one in 1202. So there you go. Maybe it's about time. The Rum Fault branches away from the Yamune, and it can be traced from there northwards for about 35 kilometers. Movement on this fault has been linked to the 1837 Galilee quake. The 1837 Galilee quake, often called the Safed earthquake, shook Galilee on January 1st and is one of the number of moderate to large events that have occurred along the Dead Sea Transform (DST) fault that marks the boundary of two tectonic plates, the African plate and the Arabian plate. Intensity assessments for the event were 8, which was damaging on the Medvedev-Sponher-Karnik scale, and 8 heavily damaged on the European microseismic scale. In 1977, assessment of the event was published in the Bulletin of the Seismological Society of America, had the epicenter just north of the city of Safed, and the magnitude was 6.25 to 6.5. But in 1997, seismologist Nicolas Ambrayes argued that the event may have been more substantial. The event was well documented by the 19th century missionary archaeologist and author William McClure Thompson. The region in which the earthquake occurred was part of the Ottoman Empire of Turkey at that time, but at the time it was under control of the Egyptians, who were occupying after seizing it during conflict. The earthquake, also known as a Levant fracture, produced strong but infrequent earthquakes and all pre-instrumental information. There was also the 1927 Jericho earthquake and the January 1837 event. A close look at damage data gives estimate of modified Mercalli intensity. The 1927 event was both microseismically and instrumentally recorded, providing a good opportunity to closely examine the microseismic instruments. Once validated, the process of analyzing microseismic data were applied to the earlier 1837 event. Mesoseismic areas of both of these Jordan Rift Valley events were along north-south line near the fault zone. There was wave damage as a result of the earthquake. Strong sight, a standing wave, swept the shores of Tiberias, causing additional death. So these things did cause a tsunami. Amazing. This is all from Wikipedia that I'm reading to you. So now we go to the other sections. The northern section of the Dead Sea Transform extends north end of Yamune Fault up to the triple junction with Eastern Anatolia Fault in Turkey, going towards Greece. The Misiaf Fault, also known as the Gob Fault, runs about another 70 kilometers from the northern end of the Yamune Fault to the Gab Basin. This estimated slip rate for the segment is 6.9 millimeters a year, so that's pretty fast. Major historic earthquakes interpreted to have occurred along the structure include a magnitude 7 in AD 115 and 1170. Magnitude 7, so they were very big. No major earthquakes have been recorded since 1170, suggesting that such an event is overdue. Gab Basin was formed in the Pliocene. It's a pull-apart basin formed due to the overlapping of the left stepping offset. And then we have the Hassi Pasha Fault, extending from the Gab Basin into the Ayamik Basin. It carries the bulk of the plate boundary displacement linked through the Karasu Fault. Major earthquakes in 1408 and 1872 have been linked to movement of this fault. And the Karasu Fault, or Amanos Fault, has southwest-northeast trend, representing part of the transition from Dead Sea transfer to the Eastern Anatolia Fault in Turkey. It has an estimated slip of 1.0 to 1.6 millimeters per year for the whole quaternary. No historic earthquakes have been linked to that movement on this fault. So basically what we're talking about is it can give major quakes, and it can even cause tsunamis, and we're overdue for an earthquake.